In reading your columns, while I believe that you're one of those people who were right about Iraq before, you were willing to be convinced.
Yeah.
So why weren't you convinced?
Quite a while before the actual war, the key pieces of evidence had already been discredited. Now, it always seemed to me that there was a verbal trick here where weapons of mass destruction was actually a dangerously misleading phrase because it lumped together poison gas, which is nasty stuff, but so is high explosive, with nuclear weapons. And in fact, all of the innuendo that got us in there was about nukes. And all of the key nuke evidence had been discredited if you were actually sort of paying attention well before the war. So if you were reading Knight Ridder, you knew that the aluminum tubes were not for centrifuges. If you were following the Niger memo had been discredited. So we already knew well before that the real scare case for the war was invalid. There was also the pattern of administration behavior where they kept on changing the story. I mean, there was a lot of emphasis on 9/11 links, which was then dropped or not dropped, but pushed into the background as it became clear that there was no evidence, and then it became WMD, and then, I mean, if you read the introduction to The Great Unraveling, which, the column collection I published, but the introduction was written actually during the war, during the invasion, and I just said, the selling of the war sounded just like the selling of the tax cuts. And with the constantly shifting justifications, but always the same policy. So that was a dead giveaway. And I guess the last thing was just the innuendo of about the Al-Qaeda Iraq links. It was clear very early on, right from the beginning actually, that there was nothing there, and yet 9/11 and Saddam were always put together in the same sentence, but always in a way. And in fact, the way the absence of specific false statements was itself a dead giveaway that they were not being sincere. That if someone was carefully watching, so that what Bush said always conveyed the impression that this was a response to 9/11, without him actually saying that Saddam was involved in 9/11, which they knew they couldn't prove. So it was all giving you plenty of circumstantial evidence that this was not being honestly sold.
Right.
The other thing, aside just from the WMD, I just thought it was worth mentioning that the odds that it was going to be a really nasty occupation, that wasn't hard to see either. I mean, I wrote back, I think in September of 2002, something about the Spanish-American War and how that turned into a really bloody occupation in the Philippines, and it just wasn't hard to see. And I really don't understand why people, even if they were fooled by the WMD, didn't see the risk of that. And
you had said that, in case people haven't noticed, the people running Al-Qaeda are smart, and that this was a perfect opportunity. This was, your suggestion was we were playing into their hands by doing this.
Yeah, which was all sort of obvious.
There are plenty of people today who, hearing you say that, it would still surprise them to find some of that stuff out. The media seemed to really drop the ball on covering this well. Why is it that to find that information, to really go in and find out where it had been discredited, you couldn't look to the Washington Post, or you couldn't look to CNN or ABC?
And look, the New York Times itself has more or less admitted that it dropped the ball too, so my employer didn't do so great either. I mean, I think the answer, which is, I find that people are surprisingly unwilling to say flat out, I mean, has a lot to do with just plain intimidation. I mean, some people may have just signed on because of group instinct, or just herd instinct, or because they wanted to be popular, but it was also very clear that anybody who stepped out of line was subjected to, first of all, torrents of hostile, threatening mail, all-out efforts by the various parts of the right-wing media machine to discredit you personally, to go after you. I mean, it was really very unpleasant to be a skeptic during that period. I think most people were just afraid. You could see. I mean, you actually were. Somewhere along the line, I caught, because other people noticed it, that I think MSNBC's website had pointed out that Bush had said something about there being a report that said that Iraq was 6 months away from a nuclear weapon, and the story on the website said that he was actually referring to a report that was several years old, and the story was up there for a couple of hours and then gone. And it was clear that someone said, "Oh, we better not make trouble here." People were terrified of suggesting that maybe Bush's people weren't being honest with us. Afraid to say it, and in some cases maybe just afraid to think it.
In his recent interview, in the transcript of the recent interview he did with Washington Post, they sat down and he said, "Well, look, I need you guys. I need you to tell the truth. I need you to do this." And the three Washington Post reporters say, "Well, you've definitely been good for business for us." And considering the state of the world right now, that was a sad statement.
From a personal point of view, if you were a pundit, if you were a reporter, even now, even given how it's turned out, you were better off having allowed yourself to be fooled. The fact of the matter is, you look at somebody like Bob Scheer, who was right all the way, and he gets fired by the LA Times and replaced with Jonah Goldberg. Now that almost everybody agrees that it's a total disaster, to discuss what we do about the total disaster, you get a panel which consists of two journalists who both were for the war and both spent 3 years saying the next 6 months will be crucial. So the fact of the matter is that it really was the smart play from a personal careerist point of view to go along with this.
You made a list of politicians who got it right, and part of what this is about is kind of highlighting the people who had the opportunity to speak out and did, especially since, like you said, it was dangerous to your career to do so.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly in the reporting, Strobel and Landay at Knight Ridder, I guess now McClatchy, were awesome. They, in retrospect, I think just because I had gotten into the habit of reading Knight Ridder, I just felt like I was not surprised by the failure to find WMD and so on. They get a lot of props. In the commentariat, it's actually pretty hard to think of people who were right. I think if you check that Bob Herbert was pretty clearly against this thing. I may be doing someone an injustice here, but I don't think there was any skepticism at the Post op-ed page. The New York Times editorial page, for what it's worth, the editorial page proper was definitely skeptical, and so they get credit for that. But it was amazing. I mean, people were basically saying that I was crazy because I was the only person who thought that we were being led astray, and I don't think that I was the only person, but I think among the in highly visible places, I was pretty nearly the only person.
Do you think that this administration has a particular ability to create a situation in which if you speak out against them, you're considered a conspiracy nut, or, I mean, they seem to have this ability to do something blatantly and openly and then say, we're keeping this secret, but then when someone speaks out, they have supporters who say, oh, you're a conspiracy nut.
Yeah, I mean, it's been unique, but I think the secret of it is that it's part of a general pattern. I mean, one of the things, actually, I've just been talking with some people about the way that large parts of the government just sort of stopped reporting honestly on stuff. That began right from the beginning, and what was amazing was how fast people like, say, the Office of Tax Analysis, the Treasury Department, caved. And I think the secret behind all of this is that it's more than just Bush and Rove, or Bush, Rove, and Cheney. Movement conservatism came to power, and there's a whole machine that reaches well beyond the government and the administration, which reaches well beyond the Republican Party. And you've got the whole media empire that's out there to intimidate, to pressure, and look at how many conservative columnists have done what the Times would basically be very upset if I did, which was to call other columnists crazy. That's sort of considered not something you do, but only the vaguely liberal publications adhere to those sorts of ground rules.